So I give away books day in and day out. My go-to book is The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. I talked about this. He's been a guest on the Mastering Midlife podcast that was before this, and he's going to be a guest on this podcast. But I love giving that book to new leaders. Another book I give away is Jay Samet's Future Proofing You, really to help us innovate and figure out what to do with this crazy future that we have no idea what it is. The new book I'm giving away by the caseload is a book by my next guest, Alisa Cohn. It's called From Startup to Grown Up: Grow Your Leadership to Grow Your Business. One of the reasons I give it away is because of how she's structured, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and also because I coach both entrepreneurs and I coach a lot of young leaders in corporate America, and young leaders who get promoted because they're really good at what they do, and now are in leadership positions and have to figure out leadership and success through others. Alisa's book just is chock full of information and nuggets and insights that you can't get anywhere else. She turns over every rock. She even has scripts for the difficult conversations you need to have. So I'm so pleased that she's here. So the official bio for my guest, Alisa Cohn, is she's an executive coach who helps startup founders develop into world-class CEOs. She has been named the #1 startup coach in the world by Marshall Goldsmith's Global Coaching Awards. I mean, what a prestigious award. She writes for Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, everybody that you can imagine. And she's just world-class. And she's here with us. Thanks for being here, Alisa.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me. What a delight to be here.
So there are so many leadership books. My shelf is covered with leadership books. I listen to leadership podcasts. I listen to leadership talks and all day, every day. What made you write this particular book?
I too have a lot of leadership books, and I too listen to leadership podcasts all day, every day. And still, I would walk into the workplaces of my clients, these startups, really fast growing businesses. And I would say something like, how often do you meet with your leadership team? And they would say, what's a leadership team? And I kind of felt like, gosh, hasn't anyone told you? And then I thought, wait, I'm the coach. I have to tell you. And I thought, I wish I had a book so I could hand them, right, to say, this is how you can make unforced error, or this is how you can prevent unforced errors. And so I had to write my book so I could hand it to them so that they could understand what the journey was actually like to go from startup to grown up.
And what was the biggest surprise they had when you started talking about this stuff?
Well, I mean, I've been a coach for 20 years, so there's lots of surprises, and specifically with my clients, especially founders and entrepreneurs of fast growing businesses, what they are surprised about is how difficult the journey is, right? No one tells them this. Also, in the mythology of startups we have these days, oh, you just flip your company after 2 years, you're successful after 10 months, whatever that is. It is not that way. That is the massive, massive exception. What my clients find is that they tell me that I knew there'd be ups and downs, but I didn't realize there'd be ups and downs right within 5 minutes of each other, or frankly, at the same time, right? This top executive quits and you're completely depressed, but then you get this brand new customer who's a massive possibility, and that's fantastic. And that happens in the span of this 5 minutes together.
We're recording this in the middle of what they're calling the Great Resignation. God, I hate that word. But with the pandemic and with what's going on, as far as employment is concerned, more and more people out of necessity are starting businesses, and a lot of them are now starting to choose betting on themselves. I remember when I bet on myself to become a coach, I was making $500,000 a year, had my American Express taken care of, right? I didn't have to pay my own expenses, all that stuff. And when I became a coach, because of the gift that I have, nobody told me I was starting a business. Nobody told me I was becoming an entrepreneur. Had no idea. It's like, oh, I'm going to talk to people and they're going to give me money. And that was a real shocker to me. Are you talking to people who are looking to transition from traditional jobs into the startup world?
Sure. I think that, there's, again, been a mythology of the startup world for now a number of years. I just wrote an HBR article specifically about how senior executives can transition into the startup world. And there's always been a desire around that. I think right now, the difference is that people with the pandemic and maybe some other things that are happening in life, people are realizing, hey, life's too short. if I want to do this thing that I said I've always wanted to do, the time is now. And I think that what the pandemic has shown us is that our future is not guaranteed. So if it's something that you want to do in your life, you've got to really get yourself together to do that thing now. I know, just to say back to you, when I started my business, I definitely didn't quite know what I was going to get, what I was getting myself into, but I definitely didn't. And also, yeah, it took me so long to kind of organize myself into a business, right? As a from a practitioner and solopreneur into sort of a business. But I will say that I just knew that if I didn't start this thing that was so significant to me and so important to me, I would always regret it. And I think people are right now coming to terms with that notion of what am I going to regret if I don't do?
Yeah, I've always heard the saying, when someone wants to be a musician, other musicians will tell you, only become a musician if you can't not be a musician. Otherwise, be a musician on the weekends and get a job with benefits and and a steady paycheck. And I say the same thing to coaches when coaches come to me and say, Mark, you're a successful coach. Should I do this or how can I'm like, look, it's very glamorous. All the coaching schools will tell you can go make six figures because, that it's a business. You need to know you're going to be an entrepreneur. You need to know that you can't do anything else. So when you talk to people who are exploring this and have been successful in their traditional job, what's the first thing you ask them to ask themselves while they're trying to make this decision?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, do you have the financial resources have you earned your independence? Really, that's kind of what I ask. Like, have you earned the right to now take some sort of a risk? And our lives are all a function of what we do and what we don't do. So what I tell younger people is save your money. And that earns you the right to have flexibility and freedom along the way. Right. So it's really about being realistic about your financial resources. And the second thing I would say is, to your point about betting on yourself, who are you to bet on yourself? And what that means is, do you have it in you to get past the difficult times, to persevere, to be resilient in the face of difficulty? Because you must realize that when you get off track from the corporate world, it is going to be a long and windy road. So you need to kind of get ready for that. And do you have it in you to kind of deal with the ups and downs? And are you ready to be uncomfortable? Because to be a coach, to be an entrepreneur, is to be uncomfortable, is to do things that you don't want to do, that you don't feel like doing, that are uncomfortable, that make you like kind of, sort of shocked that you're actually doing this. And so if you can get over that, you will maybe succeed. I mean, I can't tell you to be successful, but you'll certainly be likely to be successful if you can put one foot in front of the other. And then more importantly, you will grow. You will grow as a human being. You'll grow as an entrepreneur, as a business person. And I personally, that's my religion. Personal growth is my religion. So I think it's worth it.
Wait, what I missed the word. What was your religion?
Oh, personal growth.
Thank you. I do. You're from, by the way, is it snowing in New York yet?
Yes, it's snowing in New York.
Okay.
I'm
down by Washington, D.C. and we're getting mist.
Yeah.
So my husband is not excited because he's a snow geek. So he's, when we look at the models and it starts to go east, it's like, oh my God, we're not going to get snow. I'm like,
that's hilarious.
That's
your
what you're worried
husband's
about.
Like, right. Well, your husband's like, wake me up when there's snow. Like, this is not snow.
At least he goes out and shovels, so that's good. So so when I read that article that you wrote about moving to startups, and one of the things, increase your exposure, start having conversations with people, start really exploring what you're interested in. Because if you're going to go to a startup, you got to drink the Kool-Aid. You can't go to a startup and think of it as a job. You absolutely have to be hook, line, and sinker. I remember I was a startup guy in the tech industry for years, and that's how I had my success. And I was interviewing an engineer to work with me in my organization, and he came from Hewlett-Packard, and he had 10 years at Hewlett-Packard. And I said, we are a fast-moving startup. We don't even have marketing. Like, we have to make our own. Like, are you up for this? You spend your days in your underwear at home, working, are you ready to be traveling all over the East Coast doing this? And it really put him through the drill. So, you also said, are you the right person to go and do that?
Yeah.
My favorite thing that you said, because I'm almost 60 years old, is, use your age strategically. You're going to walk into a startup and the young people are going to see your age. Right. So how do you use your age strategically in a situation like that?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to the first thing you said, which is that one of the companies I work with hired a CFO for their company. And it was the same thing. Like, are you sure that you're ready to handle this with not much support? And you realize we don't have a lot of systems. Oh yeah, I totally get it. 3 weeks the CFO lasted. And then the CFO was like, this is not for me. Well, that's disappointing. That was a difficult process, right? But you think you might be ready for that, like, lack of systems and kind of chaotic environment. You have to really, really know if you're going to be ready. So that's first of all. The second thing is using your age strategically. I mean, age is a virtue, right? You have contacts, you have experience, you have less you're trying to prove in some ways to the younger people, so you can be a mentor. And overall, you have maturity and judgment, probably hard-won judgment. And I would say you've got to emphasize that, because if you're walking into a startup and you're a little bit older, there is going to be an assessment of you and assumptions about you, about your energy level, about your ability to take on new things, about your technology dexterity. So you've got to overcome that as a baseline. And you've also got to showcase what you bring to the table because of your years of experience.
In from startup to grown up, you separate the leadership in managing you, managing them, and managing the company. And in managing you, you talk about taking care of your physical well-being, taking care of your emotional well-being, and your spiritual well-being, making sure you're up to the task. And when we talk about, being an older person walking into a newfangled place, if we're not vibrant and you say like, really let them see your drive. But if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't really muster that and jump on the train as fast as it's going.
Yeah, I think that's right. Listen, I told you self-development, personal development is my religion. That's not really true. Fitness is my religion, right? And here's why. It's like, if you want to live a healthy life and have the energy to do the things you want to do, and if you want to also have the benefits of stress reduction and stress relief, you've got to exert yourself. That might be hard. I understand. You might not like it. I didn't like it either for decades. And you've got to learn to like it and learn to appreciate what it is to do physical training. And that is running or kettlebells. That's what I do, or, strength training, in order to keep your physical energy up. I think equally important is that you have to also feed your emotional energy. You've got to take on meditation, a spiritual practice, something, because you've got to really find it in you to kind of enjoy the journey, because the destination is not always clear. And when we enjoy the journey with curiosity and openness, we showcase a vibrancy and an openness that other people find very attractive.
That's the whole point of this podcast. The whole point of this podcast is for overachievers, hard driving people. But how do you have sustainable success? How many people have you met who are wildly successful and don't experience it, don't even know in their own bodies and their own psyche that they are successful, or are killing themselves in every other area of their life, right? So that their marriages and all that stuff is. So, how do you manage that? Going from, I have a job, I have 2 weeks off, I have 4 weeks off, paid vacation and all that. Now I'm going to go into a startup where they expect me to eat, drink, and sleep the organization. I have one CEO, I'm coaching one of his VPs, and he says, he just doesn't bleed the company. I'm like, well, on one hand, that's kind of healthy. But on the other hand, I know what you need. Like, I know what you mean, because this is a startup, right?
Right. So you can have, if you're going into a startup, you can have a lot of passion and a lot of drive. And then you also have to be clear with yourself and with people around you what your boundaries are, and kind of what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. And the more you're clear and communicate that, the more people can accept it. The other thing is, the benefit of a startup is that a startup can be very flexible. Unlike other companies now, which have fixed hours, even though we're in a pandemic or remote work, there's still fixed hours and fixed expectations. With a startup, you can do a better job adapting it to the needs of you and your fitness routine, of you and your children, you and your hobbies or whatever. And so actually there's maybe an easier way to meld your life into your work in that way.
So can you, you've been doing this for a long time and you have a very focused constituency. Can you tell who's going to make it and who's not?
Inside of startups, you mean?
In the startup world.
Companies themselves?
No, in the startup world, not the companies themselves.
Yes and no. I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by making it. So what I find is that there's a lot of early employees who are great at being early employees. And once the company, I remember I was working in one company and one of the employees told me, oh, that's big company stuff. It's 100 people. This is is not a big company, my friend, right? But they don't like systems and processes, so they're not necessarily going to make it. But I will tell you who I know is not going to make it. I had a discussion one time with somebody who'd been elevated into the head of marketing. She was the vice president of marketing. It was a big stretch for her. And there was a side of marketing that she wasn't really good at. She hadn't really exposure to, but okay, that was a growing role. Well, there was a conference that I discovered that handled that specific side of marketing. It wasn't going to give her a degree in it, but nonetheless, it was a 2-day conference. She could learn out and make a lot of contacts. I told her about it and she said, I don't like conferences that much. And I thought, I don't think she's going to make it. And sure enough, 6 months later, she had not adjusted and really stepped into the new role because she didn't really have a heart in it. And so back to the notion of bleeding the company or having your heart into it, you have to have the energy for the company, for your function, and for lifelong learning. And that's going to help you make it.
Yeah, that's, I think being part of a startup really makes that important. It really illustrates how important it is, where with a traditional job and all that stuff, some people are in for it and some people aren't. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're setting yourself up for the absolute need to have support, to have all the things that we talk about as coaches. Is just necessary.
It's so necessary. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I'm curious, when you wrote your book, what was the surprising thing when you started organizing, you started thinking about leadership, and when you started thinking about how people mature? Like, so when you're the founder, you're the chief bottle washer, you're doing everything. Then you start hiring people. Now you have to have success through others, and you have to start leading, and it's less doing, more coaching, that kind of thing. What's the surprise as you went through the process yourself that you found that it takes to become a successful leader in a startup?
The surprise that I found writing the book?
Yeah.
Well, I think, when part of what I did in writing my book is, first of all, it's divided into 3 sections, as you mentioned: managing you, managing them, and managing the business. And then it also has these scripts at the end of the book for delicate conversations and difficult conversations. And I think what hit me as a surprise was I was sitting there writing my book. I remember vividly being on the sofa writing my book, and it was coming well. And somehow I just thought, I should write those scripts down. What happens is I'm talking to a founder, on a Zoom call or in person or whatever, and we'll finally get to the point where they're willing and able to have that difficult conversation or do a difficult thing or whatever it is. And I'm like, great. And they'll say, but I'm not sure what to say. And so I say, oh, well, why don't you just say this? And I say, plunk, whatever I think they should say. And then, oh, let's go slower. And they're writing it down. Oh, can you repeat that? And I'm thinking, oh, is this valuable? This is just like common sense to me. So that happened to me enough times that it made me realize that that's actually really valuable. And so the surprise was how much, and I sort of relearned this, I should say, how valuable it is to have the actual words in order to get your mouth around the words.
It's crazy. It's simple to us because we've spent so much time learning how to communicate, learning how to meet someone where they are, learning how to have reflective listening. But for regular people, that's just not a normal thing. I remember doing a talk, and I help people with the pause, because I'm an automatic yes, right? I'm a recovered people pleaser. My book is all about being a recovered people pleaser, setting boundaries, learning to speak up, learning to have these difficult conversations. And in the talk, I said, for me, I'm an automatic yes. Someone asked me to do something, I'm like, yes. And then later I'm like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I don't have the capacity. So for me, the pause is, I say, may I get back to you for everything. I could get back to them right there. I could get back to them in 5 minutes. I can phone a friend and go, I really don't know want to do this, but I have to have a conversation about it. But for me, that stopped the automatic. And when I was done, people come up to me like months later and say, that changed everything. So those scripts that you're saying, in coaching, they say, you should never tell people what to do. I'm like, then I'm a terrible coach.
You and me both. We're bad coaches.
I am a terrible coach, because I'm like, look, we have 5 more minutes. You just brought this up. You need to go have this conversation. This is what you're going to say. This is how you're going to say it. This is what you're not going to say. Right. And when we're teaching empathy, right? So
Mhm.
in your book, you talk all about, leading with empathy and being vulnerable in a certain way. And one of the things I learned was show your scars, not your open wounds.
That's well said.
Right.
Really well
So
said.
I'm teaching, these leaders to have these empathetic conversations. And then they tell me what they're going to say. And I'm like, no, you're not going to talk about, they don't need to know what we talk about. They just need to know that you dealt with it, that kind of thing. So those scripts, you give away those scripts on your website too.
Well, they're different scripts. So on my
Okay.
website, there's different scripts, 5 scripts to have delicate conversations and 1 to make your life better. And you can go to my website, alisacohn.com. You can also go to alisacohn.com/scripts, and you can download those 5 scripts. They're different from what's in the book.
All right, great. So there's scripts in the book, which are just invaluable. And you can, just make them your own and use them. Scripts, there's all kinds of resources on Alisa's website and including all her other writing. Is there any place else that the people can look for you to get more of you?
You can definitely follow me on Instagram at Alisa Cohn or on Twitter at Alisa Cohn and say hi on LinkedIn.
Awesome. That's how I found you. So you just wrote this book, and it's really successful. It's getting everywhere. What's next for you? What is your next big project?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. I've been asked recently to serve on a number of advisory boards for startups. And so I'm thinking more about that. And then this year is a lot of speaking. So I'm going to be at Davos, which got postponed from January to May. I know, it's exciting. And I'm going to be at TED, and I'm going to be giving a talk in Amsterdam for their version of TED. So there's a lot of exciting things going on.
What's your TED Talk going to be about?
Well, I haven't decided yet. So thank you very little for asking me, but I have time.
You have such a breadth of places where you're interested and where you speak that I can't wait to see what it is. I really appreciate you taking the time. You've been on Tim Ferriss, so now you're with me. So I'm just,
now it's the big time, Mark. Now
I was so grateful. So thank you for this.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
To everybody else, thank you for following me over from mastering midlife to mastering overwhelm. We're starting off with a bang with some of the best guests ever. I appreciate your time and your attention. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.